Thank you for joining to learn more about the SWE Annual Financial Report. We'll be discussing the parts of the financial report and how to prepare it. First, I wanted to highlight some key financial dates to keep in mind as you close out your finances for the fiscal year. You're strongly encouraged to file the annual report and the IRS tax filings as soon as possible after the close of the fiscal year, which is June 30th of this year. As this session is focused on the annual report, I will direct you to the Finance Committee website for more information about those tax filings. The submission of the annual financial report opens each year in mid to late April, and it's accessible via the leadership portal for section presidents and treasurers. And you may file the financial report before the end of the fiscal year if all of your financial activity is complete. The annual financial report is a great opportunity for the transition between the outgoing and incoming treasurer. It gives both treasurers a consistent view of the financial state of the section. The idea is that the outgoing treasurer would prepare the report at the end of their term, review it with a second approving officer and the incoming treasurer, and then once it's approved, both treasurers can work together to submit the report. Make sure you capture PDFs or screenshots of the submission to keep for your section records. So what do you need to file the annual report? To prepare the annual report, you'll need a copy of your income and expenses for the fiscal year, often called the ledger, so a list of your transactions. And you'll also need balances for all your banking and investment accounts, as well as the amount of cash you have on hand. That's enough to prepare the report. In order to submit the report, you'll need to review the information with a second authorized officer, and you'll also need signed conflict of interest forms for incoming SWE leaders. There are 12 financial values to fill out on the report. One of them is the sum of all of the account balances and cash on hand that I mentioned in the last slide. And the other 11 categories come from these 11 income and expense categories. So let's go ahead and grab that ledger and we'll talk about each one so you can make sure each transaction in the ledger is labeled with one of these 11 categories. So first we'll start out with the income categories. And the first one is for dues rebates. On a semi-annual basis, HQ sends out dues rebates to sections that are in good standing. And so if you have received those funds, they would be labeled with this category. The second category is donations from companies or individuals that are designated specifically for scholarships. And those scholarships would be purely for academic pursuits. So that would include tuition, books, and fees, things of that nature. This third category can sometimes get confusing. It's donations for specific projects. An example of this might be if you're asking for sponsors for an annual outreach event or an awards banquet, or if you get a program development grant from SWE, then that often goes into donations earmarked for specific projects. And the fourth item here is general donations. And these would be donations that have been given to the section that aren't earmarked for any specific purpose. One of the ways my section sees this is that we have section members whose companies have dollar for doers programs where they can volunteer a certain amount of time, and then they have the option to donate funds to a charity or 501c3 organization of their choice. And that often comes into our section as a general donation that we can use however we see fit. The next income category is interest income. So if you have banking accounts that earn interest, that interest would be tagged with this category. And then other income is the umbrella for anything that doesn't fall in any of the above categories. So if you are collecting registrations for events or selling t-shirts, or if you get a college or university grant, that would fall under other income. This last income category may or may not be applicable to your section. It depends on how you do your accounting. But if you are using the receivable category, it would be anything that someone has said they will give you money for, but you have not yet received that. So if we go to the example of the outreach event where you've had a company say, we'll give you $200 in support of this outreach event, and you haven't received a check for that, then it would hang out in the receivables category until such time that you receive that check, and then it would go into the donations for a specific program category. That's all of the income categories. I'll go ahead and head into the expenses category. There are only 4 here. The first is scholarships awarded. So this is if you're awarding any scholarships to individuals for their tuition, books, or fees for their academic pursuits. It's understood that the scholarships category in the income section and the scholarships category in the expense section don't have to match. You could receive more or less income in scholarships than you award each year. The next expense category is the administrative expenses. So these are all of the things to run the section. So if you print out agendas or signs, if you have office supplies or have thank you gifts, that would fall into the administrative expenses category. And then for expenses, we have other expenses. So that's anything that it's the umbrella, catch-all umbrella for anything that doesn't apply to anything above. So if you have expenses for outreach events or professional development events, or if you have officers going to conferences, then those travel expenses would fall under other expenses. And then the final expense category is payables. And this is similar to the income category of receivables, where depending on your accounting method, payables may not even apply to you. But if you are using receivables and payables, then this is for anything where you have been invoiced or you have written a check that hasn't cleared the bank, and you would keep it in the payables category until it clears the bank. And at that point, it would move into one of the other 3 expense categories. Oftentimes, I see this at the end of the fiscal year when I've reimbursed a section member for something they've paid out of pocket and they haven't cashed that check yet. And so we keep that check in the payables category until it clears. A note on those payables, receivables, just a reminder that if it's in a payable or receivable category, it should not also be in another income or expense category until it is resolved or has cleared. And then if all of your transactions have cleared, then the payable and receivable categories might be 0. And if you're using an accrual accounting method for your section, then those categories will also likely be 0. Those are the 11 categories that you have to sum up to put on the report. So now that you have everything categorized, you can calculate the sum of the items in each income and expense category. You're ready to fill out the financial report on the website. So I will walk through some of the screenshots to do that. Also on SWE's YouTube channel, they have a short video that walks you through the steps. If you are a president or a treasurer, you have access to the SWE leadership portal, and you will be able to access the ability to submit the financial report. And so you do that by going to the leadership portal by clicking the leaders tab. And then on the left-hand side, there'll be an item called section financial report. And when you click that on the right-hand side, the financial report form appears. To be able to enter values into that form, you'll need to click the edit button. After you click the edit button, there'll be 5 different sections to populate. The first section is the section information. So it has your section name, your EIN, which is labeled as taxpayer ID in the form, and then the current fiscal tax year, which is the current financial year as it's labeled in the form. There's nothing in this particular section that you can edit. So just kind of verify it matches what you would expect. The next section is the income section. And so you can populate the values according to how you categorized your transactions early in the process, you can see that the items on the left mirror the income categories I discussed earlier. After you enter those values, the total income will calculate accordingly. And the next section is the expense categories, very similar. It's those 4 categories I talked about earlier. After you enter those values, then the total expense and the net income values will calculate. And then the next section is assets and liabilities. There's only one user editable field on this page, and it is the sum of all of the balances for all of the section accounts and including the cash you have on hand. The 3 other fields are calculated automatically from previously entered data. The next part is a checkbox to certify that you have reviewed the financial report information with a second authorized officer. I've included a list here of who qualifies as an authorized approver for each type of SWE entity. Often you'll review it with the section president, but for collegiate sections, there are other approvers as well. And then the final section that is new for this year is uploading the conflict of interest forms for incoming officers. Conflict of interest forms were required last year, but they were given to HQ in a different manner. Now they're integrated with the annual financial report. After you have all of those fields populated, then it's time to submit the report. One thing here is there is a save button and a submit button. If you are the outgoing treasurer and you have all of the numbers in there, but you don't have conflict of interest forms for the incoming leadership, then you can go ahead and click save. And then after June 30th, the new treasurer should be able to access the report and upload those forms and go ahead and submit it. It won't actually be submitted until you hit submit. And so make sure before July 30th that someone in your section comes back and clicks that submit button. So make sure you review the report for accuracy, take screenshots or print for your records. After you hit that submit button, you should see a green operation succeeded message come up on the website. After submitting your report, there is a way to view past financial report history if you are a president, treasurer, or data officer within the SWE leadership portal. To do that, you would go back to the leadership portal and where you previously selected section financial report, there'll be an option to select financial report history on the left-hand side. And doing that, you'll see a list of each year that your section has submitted a financial report and the values for each of the fields for the report each year. There's also a green plus button next to each year that allows you to expand the list of fields that are displayed. So anything that's not visible on the screen is just behind that green plus button.